We're with Avner Levin, who is a professor in the Department of Law and Business at the Ted Roger School of Management at Ryerson University, Toronto in Canada. Welcome, Avner.
It's great to be here.
I'm a great fan of yours, Avner, for a very long time.
Likewise.
We had the pleasure of hosting the Drones Forum back in Toronto in Canada in 2013 at Ryerson on a Sunday. I think it was Canada Day.
It was.
And a lot of what you said in your talk, which is now available on a podcast, I listen to it very often, actually, to be reminded about where we might head with all this surveillance, and if we're not careful, what kind of society we might end up in. So your law, your business insights have led to a paper which we're going to publish for IEEE Potentials Magazine very soon, actually in September-October issue. And your paper is titled Privacy in Public. And what I've done today is an experiment. I'm actually recording this interview from a McDonald's store in Albion Park in New South Wales. And I think we have no privacy, and you can hear lots of noises. I've deliberately placed myself in a corner so I won't be recording anyone behind me, but you might see shadows walk past as people walk into the store.
I am seeing. Yes.
So people are in a public space the minute they walk outside the four walls of their house. And, you know, this is how Google has said it is okay for them to take a vehicle and start street view recording in a very, very calculated manner. And so if we take the perspective of Google, even of Professor Steve Mann in Toronto at the university, who has come up with the term surveillance, you know, almost like a life logging and recording as you go about your day, recording your whole life. This has major implications for society. Could you respond to that to those opening comments?
Well, I think you and Michael wrote together fascinating work, and that term that you coined there, ubervalence, I thought that was a terrific term actually to capture where we're headed. So I think you had some really good insights in those works, and really we're sort of seeing them. You know, the thing about this is all incremental, and then every now and then you sort of pause and reflect, and you see how far we've sort of gone down that path. And I do feel that this is where we're headed unless we sort of make some conscious effort to stop it. This notion of ubervalence, in other words, it's all around us. It's cameras, it's phones, it's videos, it's location, it's data streams that we leave behind. We just are, you know, going ever more towards that situation in which we will not have a space to sort of like have like this private sphere around ourselves that we can sort of like retreat into and be perhaps anonymous. You know, many things that I think we take for granted, or at least maybe the older generation takes for granted, if I speak for myself, we are going to lose them, I think, in really quite a short time, because technology is really progressing here by leaps and bounds, and cameras are ever more ubiquitous, and location devices are ever more ubiquitous, and this is happening exponentially. So I do fear that that's where we're headed.
Avner, what happens when we lose that privacy?
I think when you really take that away from people, let's say even in public, right? I mean, this is the sort of argument that I'm trying to make. We as a society, we lose a great deal of what actually enables us to interact with each other as regular human beings. We need those kinds of things around us where we can sort of, you know, retreat from our, let's say, more public personas and have some kind of other sense in which we're saying to ourselves, we're not actually observed. We can sort of be free. We can let down our guard. We don't have to keep up our act sort of who we are, a professor or a parent or whatever identity, people might have, and we can sort of really, just sort of live the moment, I would say. And if we are going to be constantly under surveillance, and I think the issue here is also very clearly that it's going to be both private sector that will lead into the public sector, into government surveillance, then we will have really no space in which we can feel safe and secure. I think that's going to have a lot of implications for how we live as a society, for things that we take as our fundamental freedoms, freedom of expression, ability to sort of participate in a democracy. I mean, this is really leading you towards the infrastructure of a police state, and that's a frightening thought.
It sure is, Avner, and Michael has made the observation in the past. Even the police themselves are now playing to a global theatre. They have taser guns which have video cameras at the end of them. So once they're released out of the holster, they start recording the action. We have police who are at a scene of a crime and can't help themselves but to record somebody holding and wielding a machete. So they're taking photos of the scene of the crime. We have army personnel and officers now who are taking photographs of the captured. And so even the police feel they are playing to a global theatre. They, for example, come out of a police vehicle on the way to court and they look up at the camera because they know they are being taped by the news. And, they have a grin or a smile that they are being recorded and in that famous scene. So no one is privy to privacy in a public setting, especially when they feel the pressure to be playing up to the camera or to be playing up to the expectations of the global theatre.
I think those are very, very insightful observations, and I think the example of police and body cameras is particularly interesting one because there you see the real conflict between the police as a force, as something that is sort of an organ of the state, the long arm of the state, and the individual human beings that are police officers that really are living this tension. And of course, as you say, on one part they're playing, to the scene. They know that they're going to be recorded. They're just sort of behaving, in a way that they hope will be considered, a professional way or a way that will sort of send a message. At the same time, we know from the various projects with body cams that are happening in the United States and here in Canada and around the world that they very much still want to preserve the ability of their own individual privacy. So police officers here, for example, and be able to turn them on or off. And I understand that that's a very human desire. Our problem as a society is that we need to allow all of us to have that ability not to be captured by the surveillance, not just the police officers that are worried about their body cameras. So it's this insight that we somehow are lacking, right? You sort of when it comes to all of us as a society, we're just not there with the technological tools that will allow us to opt out of all of this kind of surveillance at the time being. That's really what's concerning.
I agree. I think it is also concerning, and although the body-worn cameras have been publicized and documented even in academic journals to having reduced the number of complaints against the police, so if they are wearing a camera and if they are recording, the number of complaints allegedly have dropped. However, and this is a big thing, in the past, citizens would take mobile phones or audio recorders
Yes.
and tape conversations. But now, given the response of the body-worn cameras and the short talk systems that record the audio, now citizens are being forced, I think, to some degree, to retaliate with more sophisticated technology, body-worn technology. So it's a tit for tat. I'm recording you, okay,
Yes.
you can record me. You're doing this to me, I will do that same thing to you. But there is no way. Where are we going to stop when we say implants? And that is really the ultimate trajectory of hyperviolence.
And you're so right with that. because and this is where Steve Mann was, let's say, about a decade ago, right, with surveillance, is he felt that need to go in there and react to what he saw like a surveillance in stores, in retail environments. He would go with his, body worn and really sort of try to sort of do this social protest. But what I fear is that, we're not all going to be as motivated, right, as a society, as Steve or as you or as I am perhaps motivated. And most people will, either get into these confrontations that are impossible to win, or they'll acquiesce and they'll just basically be passive. And we will only accept, those police videos, for example, as evidence. And you'll see situations in which police and law enforcement are saying, well, we're really going to discount this video from the citizen because we have all these other videos, and that's what we're going to give legitimacy. So all those instruments of power and control, you will see them, I think, again, replayed in this area of surveillance and images. And, we sort of had this brief moment in time, I think, where these cell phone videos were very powerful. And in a sense, you sort of had a dynamic there in which, citizens are sort of wresting control back. And I worry that, even that we're going to lose once we have this proliferation of, like sort of state cameras out there that as I just said, could be turned on and off and are subject to manipulation. And so there's many, many awful things about this introduction of technology that I think we're not even at the stage of really thinking through.
Exactly. There is a video, a movie that has the main character. It's the late Robin Williams. It's the movie's called The Final Cut, and in this movie it demonstrates greatly how much video evidence can be tampered with, even if someone has taken an alleged alibi for the whole of their life with a video recording that just sits right there shooting 24/7 for all their life. I think I'm worried in many ways about the reliability of video evidence. It can be tampered. We've got professors in Taiwan who have spent their whole lives looking at video authenticity, and they are saying that even the most sophisticated records and audits can be duped. And so we start to look at video evidence as real, but it's really duping us, just like any other evidence can be tampered with. The other thing I think pertinent to your talk just now and commentary is I'm worried that we're going to get to the stage where the video evidence starts to become subpoenaed. So if you're carrying one of these or a body-worn camera and you're recording and they have your location details in a crowdsourced environment, they will subpoena all the people that were there, or at least all the devices that were there, and then begin to say, okay, you show me your video evidence, or it is on the cloud and we have access, and then they will corroborate potentially whatever angle of a story, whatever provocation proof, and overwhelming evidence perhaps of scenes, and that may be to our favor at times and not to our favor at other times. And
I think that's a very, again, insightful observation, and I think we're already seeing it happen, Katina, because first of all, I know firsthand, at least in Toronto, that police will routinely go to, let's say, shop owners and say, and if there's a scene of a crime out in the street or anything, they'll just ask nicely, but they'll ask, and people voluntarily provide this now for all their videos. When we see more and more dashboard cameras on vehicles, including transit vehicles, they will pull all those videos again, even if they're just to sort of sift through it and see what happens. I remind you also of these horrible incidents in Brussels recently at the airport. The thing that stood out to me is that law enforcement in Brussels were able to pull videos all the way from the airport into the center of the city and follow that guy who escaped there, one of those bad folks there, and really have him on camera all the way. This was 10 kilometers, I think, of a trip that they had completely covered with private sector cameras. And so, of course, they were motivated. It was a heinous act there at the airport, but it just shows you the capability of what can actually happen in a far more routine basis. And I would add also to that I think we'll also see this beginning from a private litigation, because often this happens is that you have these smart lawyers that think, well, I'll just go and ask for this and that, and somebody will give that to them. And so we often see the dynamic actually starting from private lawsuits, people getting into an accident and suing each other, asking for everything that they can sort of think about. That gives sometimes police the ideas, and then it becomes a state issue. So this can begin in many ways, and I think the infrastructure for doing that is already very much there.
You know, I went to just last week with my family, and we saw some traffic on the road. And what happened? A motorcyclist had fallen down. He had been hit from the back, and the drivers were beginning to take photographs of the scene instantly. They didn't have a video cam on the car.
Right.
I think as well, and we all see motorcyclists now and cyclists wearing body-worn cameras, of course, just in case they are hit. And sometimes I see in their defense why that is a good thing for them. But going back to the question of how were the authorities in Belgium, in Brussels, able to record a 10-kilometer view of a potential suspect? It reminds me much of Enemy of the State. You know, that classic scene where Will Smith is being chased and Gene Hackman is warning him, you know, be careful because you've got these devices all over your body. In that case, they were RFID sensors and GPS chipsets. But the Argos system in the US, which took many of these cameras in this device and showed the ability to surveil at that granular level if you have enough power to do so. We are in that place. I totally agree with you. The infrastructure is there. The connectivity and interoperability between the different camera systems may not be there yet, but definitely we're getting there. So let me ask you something. What if the people say we can reduce crime to zero? We can get rid of all crime because now we are in a police state which is surveilling everything and no one can get away with anything. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that's why when I wrote my piece for the issue that you're editing, I think I sort of started with 1984 and then ended it with Brave New World, because I think that's where we're sort of heading into this combination of, on the one hand, this kind of totalitarian state, which does have the ability to sort of, you know, constantly, as you say, in uber valence, stick to it. But at the same time, what I worry about is all about the resistance to the totalitarian state. And Brave, you know, the little sort of details of their class and their statute and all those things, that they are not thinking about the broader implications of the society in which they're living in. And I think we're in this kind of deadly combination of ever-increasing surveillance and at the same time indifference, because we're just, you know, a consumer society. And that's what bothers me, is that we're going to have this lethal combination for us, and people will not care. And unfortunately, we often see in surveys that people's reactions are that they just don't care. They cannot contemplate, they cannot fathom the idea that they've been living in a democracy, let's say, for their lives or for the last 50 years or since World War II. And how is it even possible to dream of a police state? That's something that happens sort of far away. It's not going to happen in Australia. It's not going to happen in Canada. It's not going to happen in the States. It's not going to happen in Europe. Maybe it's something that happens in North Korea, you know? And so I think it's very difficult for people to really, that are just living their daily lives and worrying about the latest smartphone model that they can afford, to really get engaged with this issue. And this is the big challenge for us as a society.
One of my peers, George Michael from Wollongong University, calls this the spectacle. And it's a spectacle. We're so caught up in the spectacle that we forget that we're victims of the spectacle sometimes. And we're all, you know, worried about getting the latest Android and latest Apple iPhone and lining up in queues, that we forget that those products that we're buying are actually burying us in another way. So that leads us to the mosaic theory of privacy. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I mean,
Well, I mean, the mosaic theory of privacy really tries to come up with some kind of conceptual framework that will allow us to maybe cope with legal and policy tools with this kind of situation in which we're going around about our daily lives, and every bit of the way we're sort of tracked or traced or, or sailed. And it sort of challenges the common assumption that, just because we're in a public space means we're giving up all our rights to sort of move about freely and for lack of a better word, to have this privacy in public, to have this anonymity, because it says you need to focus as the law now, as sort of the Constitution, as this kind of institute in society that protects us and our rights. You need to focus on the big picture that all of these various little data points are creating. Oh, well, it's wrong or it's misguided to just say, because I was here up in Toronto near Bathurst Street in the morning, and because I was downtown at noon, and then I'm at third place in the evening, that all of these I'm in a public spot. Therefore, it's okay to know about that about me and use that against me. And to say, no, we actually have a profile here of where Avner lives and where Avner works and where Avner goes to hang out. And that's something that's very personal, and that's something that deserves protection, and that's something that we should only be using as a state if we have really very compelling reasons to overcome these privacy interests. So that's the kind of framework that the mosaic theory tries to create. It says we need to protect the mosaic, the whole picture that is created about us as individuals, and not just each and every tiny bit. Because if we play that, each tiny bit is okay game, then we'll lose those protections that and what we value in a society.
Avner, have you started to look at the idea of blockchain thinking?
No, say it again.
Blockchain.
No, say it again.
Blockchain, you mean like in the Bitcoin?
Blockchain,
Yes.
you mean like in the Bitcoin?
Exactly.
Tell me more about it. I don't think that I know.
Tell me more about it. I don't think that I know about this.
I'm trying to analogize blockchain within the idea and context of data, and I call it data splat, S-P-L-A-T, data splat. So imagine in the non-Bitcoin infrastructure, everything is public. I walk into McDonald's, I buy a hamburger, that record is public. And then I get in a bus and I go to work, and the fact that I walked onto the bus is public. And then I go to work and I clock in, and that data is public. And then every single trace and transaction of my life and my relationships to my work, my family, the public transport system, the purchases I make become public. And all of a sudden, we are in this realm of blockchain world. And it has nothing to do with Bitcoin, actually just the opposite. And it is for companies to come out and say, everything is public because everything can help us. And every bit of data that's generated, because we want the world to be a better world, let's go and create a world that nothing we do is private. Not even the food we buy, the sport we do, the workplace we are at, where we take our kids for childcare, everything is public, right? So no one has anything to hide, not even the credit card number, because given everything is public, no one will do anything wrong, right? It's ludicrous. It's crazy. But this is the argumentation of industry. Even to some extent, the Open Gov initiatives are exactly saying that because we can do business intelligence on taxpayer data, we will grow the GDP. So I want us to think about a world where nothing is public for a second, and what does that mean?
Sorry, you got cut off at the end there.
Sorry, you got cut off at the end there,
Katina, a little bit. When nothing is private, okay, and everything is public. Will we need cameras? And will those cameras, what will happen to that camera infrastructure?
I don't think as human beings, I think this is the big challenge. I don't think that as human beings we can actually live in a world that's completely public. I mean, I think as you know, to go to our sociology and our biology, we must have some kind of sphere that is separate and distinct from others. I think if we lose that, we'll lose humanity and we'll behave like, I think, indistinguishable from animals and perhaps worse. We need, in a sense, and sociologists have said this, we must have this private sphere in order to engage others in public interaction. So if everything we do is scrutinized and is out there, we will not have the ability to sort of organize ourselves and engage others, in society. Even in trivial matters such as like what clothes I'm going to choose to wear to work today, right? We can't even think about that engagement, if it's all done in public and everything is scrutinized. So the very, very trivial things that make up our lives are not going to be possible if we live in that kind of a world. The question really is, how far are we going to be pushed very close, I fear, to that kind of a world that we're really going to have perhaps the bare a minimum, or perhaps if I'm taking maybe a more optimistic look at it, maybe people need to be pushed to sort of eventually push back. I often wonder how sustainable is all of this, as you say, business case and government rationale and the ever increasing use of data and all of these related things. How long are we going to be able to sort of tolerate it or stand it as a society? And will there be a point when we sort of say enough is enough? But I just don't know. I mean, I thought for a long time, I thought that social media would be a fad that would go away because people would, get tired of sharing all that information about it. And now I'm not so sure anymore. I'm worried that it's just sort of like, creating this kind of culture of sharing. But even there, I think what we see is how people sort of groom themselves and preen themselves and present themselves in a certain way to sort of make their friends jealous on Facebook or to put the best image out there. So imagine a world in which you can't even do that kind of selection on social media, right? And everything that you have is immediately out there in the open. I just think people won't be able to cope in a world like that. It's just even scary to think about it, frankly.
Avner, Michael and I wrote.
I hope.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm hoping that I'm not losing you on the
I'm
connection.
sorry,
No,
I'm
you're not
hoping
losing
that I'm
me. I
not
got
losing
you.
you on the connection.
Let's hope the recording's working. Michael and I wrote a paper some years ago on the assault of privacy, and we were talking about Valence. And in the paper, Michael, being a theologian by training, he started the paper thinking about St. Augustine, who wrote Confessions. And he said, if YouTube was around at the time of St. Augustine, would he even have become a saint? Because he was making his own sins in private, and he wrote about them in his diary, of course, and that book became famous. But if he was not allowed to grow privately, to change his ways, and to go on a righteous path, on a godly path, he may never have had the chance to become a saint, because he would have been looking at reruns of YouTube of his sins with such and such a woman and so forth. And so he starts this paper in saying, we are not talking about covering up the sins of the pedophiles. This is not what we are talking about. We are not saying that we will cover up the crimes of murderers. We are not talking about privacy in that context, and we are almost very often accused, oh, you want a private space because you want to commit crime. No, that's not the reason. This is certainly not the reason. But we need privacy so that we can grow and develop as human beings, to have that free will that says, I can correct my ways, I I can do better in society, and I don't want those constant reminders which keep me there, stereotyped as the person I was 10 years ago.
I agree completely.
I agree completely. And I think probably Michael has these insights because he himself is, creative, writes, poems. And I think he's very much aware of the creative process. You need to sort of write all these drafts and get rid of them and throw it. And like, imagine if everything that he ever scribbled, would basically be part of his record. It's just unfathomable. You cannot live like
knowing
that.
Michael and his poetry work and the drafting process he goes through, he probably would have taken,
Yes.
he would just disappear. He would not be able to tolerate this, given his creative process. And you're right, musicians and others would never want their first draft out, and
Exactly.
sometimes that is how we play out our lives when we're young. Everything is a first draft, and we don't want that to be taken against us in the future for employment or anything.
Right.
Avner, go ahead.
Right.
I just wanted to say on that.
Yeah. I just wanted to say on that, you're right, and I think that's why we see these ideas out of Europe with the decision against Google and the right to be forgotten as really very powerful, with hundreds of thousands of people responding and making requests to sort of remove that earlier part of their lives that they're not happy with, because that's not who they are right now. And again, people always have this negative bias about this, that they're criminals or crooks or whatever, and it's not at all. It's very human instinct to say, I've moved on, I've evolved, I'm not the kid I used to be, I'm not the person I used to be. Why are you judging me? We had a case in Quebec in Canada of a teacher that had a wonderful career, and then like 30 years into her career, some kids found some photos of her when she was younger, and she took some photos that perhaps now she regrets. And for that, we have to destroy a person's life. I mean, this is the issue, right? And this is exactly what you're saying. And we have to have a way to be able to separate and not have all of those records in public. And that's why we're seeing people, these ideas resonate so deeply with them. And I think the other part of it is that the beauty of it, you don't really have to sort of go to court. And then that's another part that I think I try to make. In the paper that I wrote, is that it's not just about having the legal tools like a mosaic theory, it's also having the technological limitations on surveillance that are so important for our society to function. We have to have that working in combination.
Very true. Meg Letta Jones wrote a book that's just come out called The Right to Be Forgotten.
Okay.
And, Google was so swamped with the number of requests that they had to hire whole fleets of paralegals to deal with the requests. And I guess if 6 billion people did that, they would go broke tomorrow, honestly, and they would not have a business. That's how serious it is, and it's great that Europe is taking some very active measures towards that. I want to move now for a second away from the infrastructure to, I guess, Orwell's prediction that in 1984, the only thing that was private was that which was within the skull. And to quote you, quoting Orwell, always eyes watching you, asleep or awake, indoors or out of doors, in the bath or bed, no escape. Nothing was your own except the few cubic centimeters in your skull. So what happens, Avner, when we are now creating technologies that can actually know, to some degree, how you are feeling within the skull? Have we got no privacy left, or are we going down a track where there is no point of return after that?
That is a fear, and I have been thinking about that, and I know you are thinking about that, and I think everybody that is sort of worried about technology and society and ethics must think about the implications of these kind of sort of unfettered like technological developments that we're seeing. That is a very, I think, scary thought. And I do know that there are people out there that are really trying very hard to really get inside our heads and be able to capture what we're saying. And, right now, maybe you need to be hooked up to some machine and it's very rudimentary. Uh, as unethical. For example, you're not supposed to be involved in cloning, right, of human beings. And I think, we sometimes have to just say, we cannot go there. And I really worry about this kind of technology. I mean, even Orwell, as you say, with his dystopian vision, even he couldn't sort of bring himself to sort of think that I mean that really eradicates every little bit of humanity that we might have. Any opportunity to sort of create a free society would be gone if we allowed that to continue. So I worry that we're not putting the right restrictions on those kind of developments, and we should do so, I think, before it's really too late. I think they should be very, very carefully controlled. Just to make sure.
It's very interesting, when we look at the mind and thoughts. Let's talk about thoughts, private thoughts. And many of us, now for our information, I would say almost every one of us would use the internet for its wonderful access to information. And so sometimes we make the distinction that even the things that we type, those very private personal things into that tiny thing called the search box on the internet search engine, is really actually getting into our head. We're already trespassing, and depending on who's on the other side, we don't know what they're doing. For example, if we type in things like drug overdose, drug addiction, gaming addiction, gambling addiction, depression, anxiety, overworked, tummy problems, whatever it is, relationship issues, divorce, it's all out there already. The question is, what and how are companies using this information, and how are they being held accountable when we don't even know what is actually being used against us and how?
Right. And you're
right. And you're right. We sort of see the tip of the iceberg, right? When we see somebody commit for example, a very heinous crime, then we somehow hear in the news that the police went to the search engine and they found what he, let's say, was searching, and that he was searching how to do this or that gruesome kind of thing. So we sometimes sort of, it's like the iceberg surfaces for a bit, and we see a little bit of the capabilities, and then we sort of forget about it. And we especially forget about it because, as you say, we don't think about it as our regular lives. This is something that happened to somebody else who was a criminal and a very bad person, and so therefore probably it's okay that they use that information against them. And we forget that it's actually there about all of us. And as you say, with tragedies like people contemplating suicide, with people that are mentally ill, you can certainly see, we have a huge debate in Canada now around assisted dying and assisted dying legislation. You can see people arguing for the opposite, right? Arguing that they want companies to intervene and look at these search results and pass them on to the authorities if necessary. So if somebody is depressed, so that there will be like some kind of a trigger, and somebody would be notified, and like for all the good benevolent sort of factors, that we would somehow start seeing more and more of this information used. I think it's bad enough that it's used already to sell us the ads, frankly, and all that, but it's all of these secondary uses that are more and more, that interfere more and more with our lives, that are really coming down the line here. I think the capabilities are all there. All that's stopping them right now are, social and perhaps some kind of cultural, legal norms, not even really laws. It's just that somebody's going to try something, and then and then we're going to sort of have the floodgates open. That's what I worry about. It's windy. I see it's windy in Australia.
Just scared the hell out of me. Because I'm thinking about this in the context of autonomous conversational robots, and I'm just thinking, geez, you're having a bad day, and you just have a conversation with the bot, which somehow seems real because it's almost near perfect in conversation.
Right.
You can't tell the difference between the real and unreal.
Yeah.
But you ask it to assist you.
Yes. Yes.
And then what kind of autonomy do we really have?
Yeah.
It's a very dystopian ending to this conversation, perhaps, but
I'm sorry.
I think it's very real.
Sorry.
Sometimes I'm criticized. People tell me dystopia is easy, in the sense to think about dystopian ends, but actually I think they're much harder than utopian. I've been thinking about this ever since somebody made the criticism. I think utopia is very easy to imagine. Everybody wants utopia. Everybody wants food on the table. Everyone wants a safe household and a fantastic, loving relationship. Dystopia are our worst nightmares. And the paradox, I think, in this special issue is that while we all know what the dystopia is, why are we still driving towards it 100 million miles in speed?
Yeah.
So,
good point.
Yeah.
I wish I had the answer.
Good points, Katina. I wish I had the answer and the
So,
solution,
Avner,
but you're absolutely right.
I know you head up a whole privacy research group. Tell us about that at Ryerson University.
Sorry to...
Tell us about your research group at Ryerson
Sorry
University.
to...
Oh, yes. So we have a group that is...
Oh, yes. So we have a group that is really interested in privacy, and I would say all of the sort of aspects that you can imagine, from cybercrime to big data implications, in the workplace context, in an online context, things that have to do with marketing and advertising, and things that have to do with, information technology systems. And we do projects. We get together like groups of people that get together around a project in common interest, and we typically do something over the course, let's say, of a year. Try to sort of figure our way throughout some kind of an issue that's really sort of we think is topical. Like, for example, to give you a couple of examples. One issue that I'm doing now with one of our students is on mobile money transfers that are very big, for example, in Africa and parts of Asia, and the sort of security and privacy implications of having that whole kind of money system go through the cell phone infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one project. Another project that we're doing, for example, that has to do with social media, and it's interesting around these issues of identity and privacy. You probably know that Facebook, for example, is cracking down on users and asking them to do what they call the real name policy. So for a lot of people, that means that their identity that they created for the purposes of Facebook, now all of a sudden it has to collapse into their real world name. And so there are serious sort of kind of privacy and identity implications around that. People's gender identity and sexual preference and all those issues are sort of now under threat because of this social media giant decided to do that. So those are some of the examples of things that we study and that we research, and I think from a selfish perspective as academics, this field, the good thing about it is that always you have new issues come to the fore, so you're never sort of tired of exploring and investigating it. And I think that's true for the greater intersection, right, of society and technology. And this is good for us in the narrow sense that we are kept busy, bad in terms of all the implications that we're seeing.
I was just having a discussion with one of our academics at Wollongong, and he was studying the implications of edits on Wikipedia, and he said, well, that's okay. If they keep doing these kinds of sinister things, I'll just use it for more research. he's actually analyzing the changes and how they're happening. So
There
he
you
said
go.
they're giving me more to research. But yes,
Okay.
it would be great if we didn't have any research on this topic. I know that you've been doing some wonderful things over the last 15 years since I've been an academic, and we've cited your work, especially the early social media work, which I thought was spot on. You know, the taxonomies. We built on that work for our studies in location-based services with Roba, Abbas, and MG Michael. So we thank you for your ongoing contributions. I know there are some great people there, and Kavukian, Ramona Pringle, and many other wonderful personalities and academics and researchers. So thank you again for your time. It's been invaluable to hear your insights from your paper, Privacy in Public, and I really hope lots and lots of people read it in the IEEE Potentials issue. Thanks so much, Avner.
Thank you very much, Katina, and thank you, I would say.
Thank you very much, Katina, and thank you, I would say, for your own leadership on these issues. And I think, again, since we've met, I really,
in terms of looking at the implications and seeing where technology is leading us,
and then a few years later, sort of everybody's catching up to you and sort of seeing, okay, well, that's where we were headed. So I think I really appreciate the work that you folks are doing, and you especially and down under, as we say. And I wish I'd have the opportunity one of these days to come see you folks there in person. Who knows? But for now, we're happy to do it. With the technology again. Technology is our aid and our nemesis at the same time.
Thank you so much, Avner.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
Yeah.